with Elizabeth. Um, sorry. I hope everyone's having a good evening. I just want to remind everyone to, if you could please mute your computers, your microphone, and your video if you don't want your video shown. If you could do that. And then a couple of notes for the Victorian Society. We have a walking tour coming up. It is at the Poster Museum. It's on Ethel Reed. That event is in our chat. The link is there for you if you would like to join that. It is on March 28th. Elizabeth has also so kindly given us a discount for her book for 10% off and free shipping. That link is also in the chat. And it is a very beautiful book. And if you enjoyed tonight's lecture, please go and order that from her. And I think we will just go ahead and get started. I want to introduce Elizabeth really quick. She's a senior editor in publications and editorial department at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. She earned her PhD in art history at the Graduate Center, City University of New York, with a focus on 19th century American painting. She holds an MA in American Studies from Columbia University and a BA in English and art history from the George Washington University. Her articles appear in American Art, 19th Century Art Worldwide, and West 86, a journal of decorative arts, design history, and material culture. Her book, Dressing Up the Women Who Influenced French Fashion, published by MIT Press, is available now, and it is the winner of 3 publication grants, including the Aileen Rivero Grant from the Association of Dress Historians. So, without further ado, thank you tonight for joining us and doing this lecture for us, Elizabeth. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and to share dressing up with all of you. I am going to show some wonderful images now and talk about the book. Can everyone see the title slide? It's the cover of Dressing Up. Excellent. So thank you again, Alicia. It's such a pleasure to be talking with you with the Victorian Society of New York. It's such a terrific organization and just really a thrill. So thank you. I love talking with people about the book because it gives me a chance to show images that didn't quite make it in or were too costly for the publisher. So I'd like to give you a sense of behind the scenes, which is really, really fun for me. The topic of women, American women buying French fashion in the 19th century is endlessly fascinating to me. And I hope to you. What I try to do in the book is to restore the sense of equilibrium between the creators of couture and the patrons of couture in the period, specifically by looking at the women who were spending money on garments. Many of the names of the American women are familiar to us, especially in New York. Astor, Vanderbilt, Schermerhorn, also Gould, Glessner, Mackay, Stanford. And yes, these were wealthy women spending family money, but they were doing it with intention and in many cases, a surprising amount of practicality and frugality. Just for a sense of context, a dress in the 1880s might cost $1,600. That would be the equivalent of $47,000 today. So a sense of perspective and a sense of relativity for us. Many people ask me where the inspiration for the book came from. And as with so many inquiries, it started with John Singer Sargent's Madame X, which many of you are familiar with. It's in the Met and it dates to 1883 to 84. And I was working on an article about women's fashion and hairstyles in portraiture, and it was for the journal West 86, put out by the Bard Graduate Center. It's a terrific journal that I'm sure you're familiar with. So I was working on this article and I sent a review copy draft to a friend from the Graduate Center at City University of New York, where I did my PhD. And he said, I think we need to know more about who made the dress. And this is a very loaded question because we don't know who made the black, slinky, slim-fitting dress in Sargent's portrait, and we probably will never know. But we do have one mention in a Parisian newspaper that says that Madame Gautreau, who was Madame X, she was from New Orleans and married a wealthy Frenchman and lived in Paris. She was known as a professional beauty. And we know that she was a patron of the Maison Felix. And this launched years-long research into the Maison Felix. We believe that the house may have made this design. It was known for slim-fitting designs for narrow women. And we can set up the house as sort of a foil to one of the competitors of Felix, which was the House of Worth, which is the best known designer of the time. But there's so much more that we don't know about Felix that I've been trying to recover as much as possible. And in the book, I introduced the owner, Émile Martin Poussinot, who was called Felix. And I've been tracking all the known garments by Felix in Europe and the United States, and there are quite a few. They were in business from the 1860s to 1901, and in the book, I track the possible reasons why the house shut down abruptly in 1901, which I believe had to do with the owner overspending on an exhibit at the Paris Exposition of 1900. There were also labor issues at the time. This extraordinary opera gown is a recent acquisition by the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in Los Angeles. And they've been terrific partners in my quest to find garments and to study them by Felix. They also have a matching opera gown for the daughter of the owner. The curator over there at FITM is Kevin Jones, and he was so gracious in allowing me to reproduce this dress in the book. And he said, Liz, we also have the daughter's matching opera dress. And I said, what? There was a child's dress. He said, well, not a child. She was in her late teens. So the daughter was coming out into society and had a matching opera gown with her mother. It's just extraordinary. The dress is cream colored silk. It's less peachy than it looks in this photograph, but you can see that she's wearing the long opera gloves that would have been requisite. You can see the bustle, the typical bustle of the late 1880s protruding from the lower back, and all of the sashes and all of the detailing, and her headpiece, we should not forget, as was the norm for this period. The shop, the Maison Felix Salon, was at 15 Rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré, and it was spread out over several floors and was finely decorated. As you can see in these archival photographs, the salon was revamped in 1892, and in 1894, one of the Parisian newspapers did a spread on the interior decor. We're so lucky these images exist. They give us so much information. You can see that the salons were meant to resemble a salon in an upper class home. So you can see the greenery of the potted plants, the draperies that kept the space warm, along with the carpeting. There's plenty of comfortable seating and plenty of mirrors. The Maison also commissioned the artist Louise Abema to paint portraits of Parisian actresses in theater productions. So we have another image where we have a portrait of Sarah Bernhardt by Abema. So it's filled with women's imagery, which, if only we could recreate and be there today. Also, live models would circulate through the space, including the owner's wife, to model the latest designs. And again, it's really women's space here. Where were the men? Where were the husbands? They may have been in a drawing room space on a lower floor, or most likely they were not there. They were at home or they were at work, and women would travel either on their own, yes, on their own, or in pairs or small groups to have their fittings. The firm was a household name in the United States. It was spoken in the same breath as Worth, Paquin, Doucet, but it has fallen out of the historic record because we don't have business documentation or ledgers for it. I've been in touch with family members and have gotten as much as possible, but still waiting for other documentation to turn up. Again, it was in business for so many years, so there's more to know for sure. But one of the projects of Dressing Up is to restore our collective knowledge about other designers, many of them who were women and who we have lost. So in addition, we can name Madame Rodriguez, who designed in Paris and for whom there is a gorgeous blue and red dinner gown in the Kyoto Costume Institute. And I have that reproduced in the book. Luckily, they provided permission. Other names, La Ferrier, Paquin, Lippmann, Pascoe, there's so much more, so many more to discover. We can set the scene here in Paris using a painting by Jean Barrault, who was known for showing Paris city life. We see a bustling shopping day on the Rue de la Paix. The house of Doucet was at number 21 on this famous street. At the upper left, we can make out part of the sign. We can see part of the O, the U-C-E-T at the upper left for Doucet. In the center of the composition, we see a shop girl holding a dress box as her client approaches her horse-drawn carriage after a shopping day. Barrault really comes in handy for my topic. I love this painting as well. It's in front of the Maison Paquin, about 1900. At the upper right, you can make out the PAQ of Paquin's sign. These signs dotted the city, and as historian Claire Zalk says, they marked the urban landscape with names. And I love how she puts that, because there were so many international names of people who were so integral to the fashion industry. And the signs are one way of recreating and restoring them by looking at paintings like this. Here, a pair of women are turned out in their summer afternoon dresses and hats at the middle right foreground. They're perhaps discussing their shopping excursion, and another customer exits the store. She's glancing at the women as a doorman looks on. Meanwhile, a carriage has arrived to let off a woman to come to shop. The valet lets her out. You can see her wonderful blue skirt, and she's about to step onto the curb. One of the main themes in Dressing Up is how vast the fashion industry was in Paris. When we look at the industry as a whole, we see all the components that made it function. The couturiers, who were designing the garments and having them made by their staff, the coiffeurs, the hairdressers, seamstresses, the makers of lingerie, the perfumers, accessory makers, don't forget all the parasols that were around, the milliners who made bonnets and hats, the trunk suppliers, and the shippers for the transnational customers. All these specialties relied on one another to make the fashion industry a success. I'll focus here briefly on the hairdressers and perfumers. Sometimes they were the same person or firm. For example, Lenterique. Here we are looking at Lenterique's hair salon. And I just love this image so much. It's very, a quick graphic that's in a newspaper, but it gives us so much information. There's a caption that says that here we're looking at the American style of shampooing, which the company was very proud of offering. The American style of shampooing was doing so with water. So you can see the three clients, they're women. So male hairdressers working with women's hair. The women are, they're leaning over a basin to have their hair washed with water. You can see the running water coming out of the faucet. And so the American style was using shampoo with water. The other way of washing hair was called dry shampooing, and that was to sprinkle powder in your hair and to brush out the dust. And it was recommended that you did not wash your hair more frequently than every 2, 3, even 4 weeks with water. And I'll also draw your eye to the apparatus in the middle right. That is one of the earliest hair dryers. The modern hair dryer was invented in 1892. This image is from 1893. So it's on wheels, and it could be wheeled from station to station to dry the women's hair efficiently when they were in the space before they were going home. Here's Lenterique's florist workroom. The women are fashioning and arranging silk flowers for sale. And so these are women working. So these are middle class women working. And at the back, you can see the shelves of the perfume bottles. There's another image that I didn't bring today, but it shows the men in the basement of the building, of Lenterique's building, and they're making the perfume in large vats. It looks like they're sort of stirring kegs of beer or something. So people ask me, how did you come to focus so heavily on the hairdressers, the perfumers, and all these other contributors to the fashion industry? And there's a longer explanation, but when I was spending all this time in Watson Library at the Metropolitan Museum where I work, I was flipping through the pages of the French periodicals and looking at the fashion plates. I kept noticing in the credits and the captions that not only was the couturier identified and credited, but also the perfumer, the hairdresser, the corset maker, if there was a parasol maker, all of these makers were credited. And here's an example from 1858. The dresses are by the House of Gaglen. The coiffures are by Madame Camproget, who I have not researched yet. And a later one from 1878, dress designed by Lefebvre and perfume by Legrand. Legrand was a popular perfume maker that was picked up by many of the periodicals. So you start to wonder, that firm may have bought lots of advertising space, and that's why they also appeared so frequently in the fashion plates. But I struck upon, how closely these different professions were working together when they shared credit space on the fashion plates, especially thinking about the perfumers. I kept thinking, well, the perfumers are credited in these fashion plates, but perfume is not, it's scent, it's not visual. So, but it was so strong in the minds of the consumers. And digging a little more, I found that it was quite a frequent practice to have small perfume sachets, so silk sachets of like 2 inches by 2 inches, filled with violets or rose petals. And the small sachets were sewn into the linings of the couture garments so that they would carry the owner's favorite scent. And for example, Worth would do sachets with violet leaves and powder. And it's just extraordinary to envision a client buying a dress that has their favorite scent sewn into it. And so when the box would get shipped from Paris and the customer would open it in New York, the dress would have their favorite scent. So it's such a personalized product and experience. So now that we have a sense of the fashion industry in Paris, let's talk about how the French styles disseminated in the United States. In the US, department stores were the hallmarks of democratic marketplaces. We know their names: Lord & Taylor, B. Altman, A.T. Stewart, Bloomingdale's. For any fans of the Gilded Age television show on HBO, we saw Bloomingdale Brothers in an episode last week. They sold American goods, but also a large array of French fabrics, trimmings, and finished high-end garments, many imported directly from Paris. Buyers from these stores would go to Paris, see the designs, and place orders. So the relationship between French couture and American department stores was symbiotic, and it did not take long for knockoff goods to come into the marketplace, a topic that I cover in my chapter called The Underworld and Afterlife of French Couture in the United States. Another way that styles disseminated was through pattern books and periodicals. Here's a colored lithograph put out by Butterick showing the summer fashions for 1875. It is economically designed to show as many styles as possible for a range of ages, including children. One of the most influential women's magazines was Godey's Ladies' Book, which many of you will be familiar with. It began in 1830 with the title Ladies' Book, and it was published in Philadelphia. It relayed fashions from both London and Paris and carried accounts of royal events and masked balls. In 1852, it started to take mail orders from readers for patterns. And in 1853, it commenced printing patterns on its pages. In the 1850s through 70s, the reporting of French fashion increased, as did the magazine's readership, reaching an impressive 150,000 in the early 1860s. Many of the hand-colored fashion plates in Godey's were taken directly from French periodicals. Frank Leslie's magazine and Peterson's magazine provided similar coverage, with the former putting out several volumes of Frank Leslie's Ladies' Gazette of Paris, London, and New York fashions in the middle of the century, an indication of when the big three cities had become ensconced in the US fashion consciousness. So women would gather ideas from magazines and then buy materials to sew their own versions of the garments at home or bring them to their local dressmaker to do so. Here we have a trade card for a local purveyor of dress goods in Jamestown, New York. And here, a calling card for a dressmaker in New Orleans and a trade card for a product that protected skirt bindings. I'm showing them to give a sense of how many dressmaking establishments were run by women, and that the fitting room scene was a women's space and very much a social space. I can't resist showing this. This is a paper doll set in the American Antiquarian Society in Massachusetts. It's a doll set for a bridal party. I'm just showing a few here, but it's so useful. These fashion paper dolls are so helpful to show us color that we normally wouldn't see, and especially to show us undergarments that we don't see in quite this vivid way that we see here with this woman. There's also interchangeable bonnets and dresses. You know, so much color is lost to us when the extant garments come to us, which of course we're grateful that they do, but I just love the freshness of this with the bride and the bridesmaids, and especially with how frequently weddings are discussed in the periodicals that I read and in the memoirs and diaries, that this brings some fun, some joy to the scene. I talk about weddings quite a bit in my book because they're the most frequently documented events, and the garments survive because they're handed down through the generations. Of course, again, the colors fade. Another main category for fashion was fancy balls. And we simply must talk about the Great Vanderbilt Ball of 1883. In 1883, William Kissam Vanderbilt and Alva Vanderbilt had held an enormous housewarming for their new mansion at 665th Avenue at 52nd Street here in Manhattan. It was on a Monday night, and they invited, we think, it's rumored 1,000 to 1,200 guests. We'll never really know. And rumored that about 600 people attended, but they didn't give exact instructions on what type of fancy dress people should wear. So we had this huge variety that comes down to us, mostly in photographs, party photographs by Jose Mora, which are so invaluable. And there's a huge trove of them in New York Historical Society and also Museum of the City of New York. The Vanderbilts were rumored to spend $250,000 on this one evening, which would be the equivalent of $6.8 million today. On the left is the famous electric light dress worn by Alice Claypool Gwynne Vanderbilt. She was the sister-in-law of William Kissam Vanderbilt, the host of the party. And she commissioned the outfit from Charles Frederick Worth, who ran the House of Worth in Paris, and he made this electric light dress for her. And I had the pleasure of viewing this dress in person in 2019. It's held and cared for by the Museum of the City of New York, but in 2019, it was on view at the museum at FIT, and it was such an extraordinary opportunity. The dress was behind plexiglass, but it still had its vibrancy. It's less yellow than it looks in the photograph, and it's a petite dress for a woman of about 5 foot or 5'1" And I was struck by the tinsel on the sleeves. The tinsel really catches the overhead light, even in an exhibition space and even within plexiglass. So I can only imagine how the effect that it had at the original party. And the House of Worth made a prop for her as well. And you can see in the photograph by Maura at the right that she's holding a battery torch, a battery powered torch. So this was really the height of the moment. You know, electricity had just come around in some commercial spaces, and then for a lucky wealthy few in their personal homes. And one of the other points that I like to make with these images is that there was no strict division between couture, what types of garments couturiers could make. So there was no stigma in the fact that the couturiers made fancy dress costumes. So they were making high-end garments, and they were also making costumes for fancy balls, all in the same season every year, and turning them out, you know, with an extraordinary quality.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
I was just going to say, I was able to see this dress as well because they used to have it on view at the Museum of the City of New York and the Tiffany Gallery. And it was not behind plexiglass. It was just right there in front. And I remember it being one of the first dresses that I, got to see so close. And I was just struck by how beautiful it was. And if I'm not for sure if they still have it out, I know that's a rotating gallery, but if anyone wants to see a gorgeous, amazing, well-crafted dress, then I suggest, checking with the museum and seeing if they still put this out on rotation, because I just couldn't believe it was just right there in front of me.
It was right out in the open.
And how tiny, just how tiny the dress was. And
it's petite. It's like I said, so I'm 5'2", and it was, a little bit smaller. But yeah, the detail and the train that, that can be released and pulled down, there's so much to it. And I'm so glad you mentioned that you were able to see it in the round, because these gowns, these costumes were so three-dimensional and sculptural, and in the book, I have a chapter about how the dresses interact with the architecture of the moment of the period. So these enormous mansions, and how the dresses were all a part of the interior decoration, but there's absolutely an aspect to them that is sculptural and architectural too, when you think about how this piece moves and works. But I'm so glad
it shines, and
I'm so happy to have that reminder to get up to Museum of the City of New York and see what's out. Their garment collection is just to die for. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous.
And here's another photograph. This is, again, Alice Claypool. She's seated, and this is her husband, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, and he's dressed as an 18th century duke, and he has a powdered wig, and he is really striking a pose here. You can see, with the stockinged legs and holding his headgear in his right arm. These photographs are, they're really priceless to have these documents. So for fancy balls, how did people get their ideas for their costumes? One way they did was by looking at books. So there were guidebooks, handbooks on fancy dresses, and one of the most prolific ones is the one by Archer and Holt called Fancy Dresses Described. The first edition is 1878, and then it comes out in 9 more editions. So there are there are many extant versions of it. Watson has 1 or 2, and many other libraries. So on the left, I'm showing the page from Holt, which is of a hornet costume. And on the right, you can see that Constance Reeves Borland had her dressmaker make the hornet costume and adhered pretty closely to the drawing from Holt, but you can see that she used some artistic license and made the dress sleeveless rather than this long sleeved, almost turtleneck type top on the left, and instead replaced with long sort of opera gloves. And don't forget to see on the back, she has her wings. So, and this was another photograph by Mora with the backdrop. So these were staged photographs, many of them taken at the party, and then the rest would be taken at his studio downtown in the subsequent days. But in Holt, Hornet was just one of the most popular, but some of the other themes that you could choose from were electric light, as we've seen newspapers, photography, postage, telegrams, chocolatier, many to choose from. And it really gives you a sense of the zeitgeist of the moment, so the themes that people were choosing. Finally, I have a chapter in the book about recycling and repurposing of clothes in the period, which speaks to the larger theme of how American women came to the couture marketplace with a deep knowledge of fabrics, sewing, and caring for garments. Here we see a 2-piece dress made by French couturier Melanie Pascaud about 1878, when it was purchased by Frances Drexel Paul of Philadelphia. In the portrait of Paul by Charles E. Drake from about 1890, she wears an alternate bodice that was made by a Philadelphia dressmaker, and both of the bodices are still in the collection of Drexel University today. And it shows how people would stretch their purchases, if you will. Some bought extra fabric in France and then had additional pieces made at home. Women would rewear their outfits over the course of years. When they were finished with them, they might sell them to a secondhand purveyor or donate them to middle-class women for use by their maids. This led to a trickle-down effect of disseminating styles over the course of years. And again, these women were trendsetters. They were dictating the styles as much as the couturiers were over the course of years. As you know, Frances Folsom of Buffalo, New York, married sitting President Grover Cleveland on June 2nd, 1886, when she was 21 years old. For the wedding, she wore a gown believed to be by the House of Worth. She became a style icon very quickly, with women across the country copying her garments and her signature hairstyle with the curled bangs in the front. We get a further sense of Frances Cleveland's style when we look at this ensemble of a skirt and 2 bodices in the National Museum of American History. During my research, I learned that the original floral sheen skirt and peach velvet bodice were probably made around 1895 by the House of Doucet in Paris. And recall, I showed you that painting by Barreau, and we saw the partial sign by Doucet. The green velvet bodice was created later by Baltimore dressmaker Lottie M. Barton. The combination of work by a French couturier supplemented by a bodice commissioned from an American dressmaker underscores one of the main themes of my book. There was a rootedness in familiar local practices, and it produced an entrenched frugality that was not relinquished quickly, even for first ladies. Some wealthy American women would bargain down prices quoted by French couturiers, and many did what Frances Cleveland did, bring extra French fabric to a local dressmaker to produce supplementary pieces, or ask them to rework fabric already in the ensemble. So to conclude, women were exerting their influence in one of the key industries in France's economy, which was couture, and also in the United States. They were influencing local dressmaking and department store businesses. They were impacting the economics of this era on their own terms, and they relied on their expertise of social norms as well as their knowledge of fabric. They could make or break reputations. They had a significant impact on a major industry, both as consumers and influencers. Thank you very much. And I have this final slide up sharing my contact information in case anyone would like to share research or research ideas or anything further. And now I will take my slides down so we can move to some questions.
Yes, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And once again, just to remind you, there is a discount offer for Elizabeth's book. The code is in there. It's 10% off and free shipping. And it is a gorgeous book. It's beautiful, worth dress on the cover, vibrant and nice and thick, lots of information, but also lots of gorgeous images for you to look at. And I love how you were able to, that's the beautiful thing is these dresses, so often you don't get to see them, but we have the photography that because they're just different on the wearer than they are on a mannequin, and to see the juxtaposition between them is really beautiful.
It's so true. Many of you I know have published your own books, but I was very firm with the publisher, MIT Press, which was just wonderful. They were wonderful to work with. But I was very firm at the beginning of the process that I wanted full color and that I would accept, nothing less, or I would, move on. It's very costly to print in full color, but they worked with me and they were so terrific. And I'm so pleased that the color is distributed throughout the book because, otherwise a lot of us would end up using the same open source images.
Yeah, the black and white.
And the black and white.
Well, luckily, so many museums have caught on to this and have taken beautiful studio images of these costumes. And I assume working at the Met, you've got to visit a lot of these beautiful specimen ladies. I hope so.
I did. It was such an honor to go down to the research, to the storerooms, and the storerooms at the Met and the Costume Institute, had been revamped for so many years, and they were closed and they reopened, and you had to go through, social security number, blood type to get an appointment. And those were some of just the best times right before the pandemic, when I got to visit with the Félix dresses that are in the collection and to go through with the technicians and to look at, the seaming on the sides. You could see where waists had been taken in or let out. Many of these women were, having children over the course of their lives every few years, but they were re-wearing dresses, gowns, and fancy costumes. So you can see the reworking, and you can also see signs of wear. So there's really nothing like visiting with the actual garments.
Yeah, that was one thing I found, well, not one, but one of the many things that I found interesting was the secondhand use of these. I studied fashion history, so obviously, we know that they had, women in Victorian times had ancestors who had, 18th century, and then we'd rework them into Victorian dresses, and they were collecting lace and adding it. It was a romantic period. But to see that these women, anyone who's even watched the Gilded, the new show out, knows that these women and their houses, the just amount of wealth they had, to imagine that they would rewear dresses when they're trying to elevate their status and prove themselves. And they're like, no, I'm just going to add a little lace and, and then I'll just wear it out to this ball. And then, okay, I'll wear it to the opera. And
it's true. And that's, another point that, is a through line throughout that comes throughout the book, is that there was this practicality. These are US women, originally colonial.
Those shopping trips were only so many times.
Yeah, and their knowledge of the fabric. I mean, if they knew what the fabric was worth, they knew it was worth reusing and adjusting and tweaking. And if anybody's watching the HBO show, I noticed that Cynthia Nixon's character, who's the older, the unmarried aunt, she rewears a certain dress a few times, and I keep catching it in the episodes. But that's, that's true to the use. I mean, and they were changing clothes so many times per day as well, up to 5 or 6 times per day.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you have to rewear them when you have like second dinner and like tea and like all of these different, activities throughout the day. We have a question from Eve. Does documentation survive of how in heaven's name women got these gowns cleaned and how they set down? Did you find any?
So cleaning is a big topic that I'm just turning the corner into getting into. So I have invoices from Mary Golette, this is one of these Newport, Rhode Island families in New York. And there's this extraordinary trove of invoices from a few of her shopping trips to Paris, and they survived in the drawer of a bureau that made its way into the Newport Historical Preservation Society.
And a hole in the wall that someone.
And so these were in the drawer, and so you could see where she was shopping, what she was shopping for, how much she paid, and then also what her husband was buying, what he was paying for. They also bought a bulldog while they were in France.
Yes.
Bulldog came back across. But there's an invoice for a cleaner that she used. So she used the same cleaner over and over, and we do need to know more about the process for cleaning. So, I mean, I imagine it was some type of a dry process, but
with velvets and silks and which mostly undergarments were what needed to be cleaned because that's what your body was closest to. But yeah, I can imagine walking out in the streets, and you hint upon that a little bit on your in your book, about mud getting on the trails and
so the mud would get in the bottom of the skirt. You can see in a lot of the Barraud paintings and fashion plates too. Actually, the Maison Felix put out a gazette, a one-year gazette, 1897. We have a few issues in the Bibliothèque Nationale in France. And very often the women are like, holding up the bottom of their skirts, and it's very like a dynamic sort of model walk that they have. So protecting the garments, but yes, they needed to be cleaned. And then the signs of wear, you see sweat stains when you go into storage and look at the undergarments or the insides of the bodices. But I would like to know more about the actual cleaning process. So what were these people getting paid for? And especially knowing so much, I do a lot of reading on hair care practices and knowing how skeptical people were of using too much water on a constant basis. I imagine that carried over to the garments as well. Thank you for that question.
She also asked, when did anyone respectably wealthy become willing to wear ready to wear? And when was this no longer considered plebeian?
Right, the ready to wear, so it is that trickle down effect. And we see toward the turn of the century that the department stores are no longer faithfully copying the French couture, but they're knocking them off, and they have sort of a diluted look to them. And there's fake labels, Felix fake labels come into the marketplace by the hundreds. And so for ready to wear, so buying at department stores, the women who are buying at department stores, and another aspect that's fascinating to me that I get into a little bit is that many of the women, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, were wealthy because their husbands owned and ran department stores.
Mm-hmm.
So they were selling some of the original couture, and then eventually were selling the knockoffs. So, the wives could go in and get, whatever they wanted on,
mine.
and just sign for them. But for these women, you don't start to see the shirtwaist come in really until, after the turn of the century. But I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I remember this was one of the hardest decades for me to remember the changing styles, or hardest periods, I shouldn't say, because when you study fashion history and what we have available, you see the changes decade per decade. And then when you get to like the 1870s to the 1890s, the bustle changes. And I remember one professor brilliant professor, we all love her, made us put the years of when the bustles changed. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Because they just sporadically change. And I think it's due to the advent of so many big department stores opening up and fast fashion,
Yeah.
just like
And,
today.
and when you really get into it, I mean, especially with the bustle business in the 1880s, there's like these efforts to revive it, and then there's people who hate it, and it's sort of an up and down thing. It's kind of difficult to track, and yeah, it's a changing decade for sure.
We have another question. It says from Rachel, I was not aware that French fashion plates also mentioned perfumers. Did they ever mention which specific fragrance was paired with the ensemble? And are the scented sachets sewn into the couture gowns the earliest examples of fragrancing high fashion?
Excellent
I was
question.
actually going to ask you something about that too. So
yeah, the perfume aspect is so thought-provoking. And so what I see happening in those fashion plates is that a few different dynamics, but the scent seems to be paired with the color of the fabric and the color of the. So violet, orchid, rose, the orchid scent comes up quite often. So it is all floral. I don't see any like spice perfumes being mentioned. So matching scent with color. And I think there's also a correlation with hair color and with women's coloring and skin tone. And then I really also think that there is a business aspect behind it. So it's very clear that certain designers had agreements with certain perfumers and certain hairstylists, because you see the pairings come up quite frequently. So the House of Worth is often paired with L'Entérique for hair and perfume. And then this Legrand, who I'd like to do more on, comes up very frequently. So as I mentioned about advertising dollars, I think you could buy your way into being paired with one of the top couturiers in the fashion plates. And the sewing in of the sachets was in the Parisian. So it was, it was very small, but you can imagine that the shipping would take, if you could either bring your dress boxes home with you on the steamship, or if the dress was taking a while, it would be shipped to you. And then there's, Alva Vanderbilt writes in her memoir, remembering opening a dress box and having the scent come out. And it would have been a scent that she would have requested.
Yeah. And I find that amazing. I wonder if they use this to market, like, oh, well, this is what Mrs. Vanderbilt wears, or this is the Aster scent, or the Shimmerhorn scent would be,
There's there's articles like gossip columnists who write about these women's favorite scent, and how you can do make
it
mortar and pestle it at home on your own. But yeah, I think Caroline Astor went for an iris scent, and she was very consistent with her choices. You can see, her family jewels, it comes up in the newspapers all the time. She wore the same diamonds and became known for them. Why wouldn't she? But being known for her scent as well, and the colors that she chose. So she liked to dress in black and dark purple, and was fairly conservative overall. And the scent does seem to be consistent.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Eve. I've read the letters of 19th century women artist who was asked to update the sleeve shapes on a portrait she'd done of a wealthy woman. Have you ever heard from that portrait where the couturiers and the clothes show signs of updating?
Oh my God, I'm so glad you bring this up, because my next book project is on hairstyles, and I just read an account of how important it was to choose a hairstyle that wasn't too fashion forward, because if you were committing thousands of dollars to have your portrait painted by someone like Sargent or Carolus Duran, it was a major investment that you wanted to last for years. So you didn't want to have like the Langtree, you know, curl that was of that season, but something more conservative. And there's this warning by a woman journalist saying, yeah, don't choose a sleeve that's going to go out of style next year, because imagine how much it would cost to have the painter come back and repaint it. But I love that you found an actual account of that, because it's terrific.
Yeah. Well, we all know Madame X, but that was for a different reason. Her painting was, her dress was, yeah, updated. Yeah, so that's very, very interesting. I'd love to, that would be a great, yeah. You're gonna have fun with that, going through all the different paintings to try to see what's updated, what's changed. X-ray, even X-ray.
X-rays can show what was, yeah, the Madame X X-rays famously show the moving of the strap.
Wow. Does anyone else have any more questions? I guess. Thank you for your answer. Is the historic fragrance house of Legrand aligned with the current brand Aritzia L. Legrand?
I believe so. Is it Aritzia?
Aritzia?
Yeah, that.
Orizia.
Yeah, that Aritzia fragrance goes really far back, and it comes up constantly. So if anyone's out there is working on perfume history, I think that would be a really great topic to track. When there's existing bottles, you can do a lot, and labeling, you can do a lot with that. For L'Enterite, there isn't that much, but for Legrand, take it away. I would love to read that paper.
I know perfume history is just, it's so amazing that you just wouldn't think. I remember when I was at FIT, one of the graduating classes did a perfume exhibition and found all these beautiful bottles, and it's such a interesting topic and subject. And I love how you were relating it to like the hairdressers, because I was thinking like, oh, the French version must be just put perfume in your hair and, you know,
call it clean,
call it, you know, like the French bath. But they are correlated, you know. I mean,
they are.
Water was dirty, and you know, you didn't know, and
hygiene concerns about overuse of water on the body.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting correlation. Okay, unless anyone has anything else to ask, this was an amazing talk. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you all for attending. And if you do buy the book and would like it signed, I have these really wonderful book plates that I can sign and put in the mail to you. So just send me your address and you can attach it inside the cover of your book.
Great, and we have the link back up, and like she said, all her information is also in the chat if you want to ask more questions, if you think about anything. This has been a really great talk, and I'm so excited to moderate for you because I've been away from fashion for a little bit. So it was great to like kind of
get back into it, Alicia.
Get back into the swing and look at all the beautiful photos and, you know, dresses that I used to like scourge through the image searches.
And now we're all going to go to the Museum of the City of New York too.
I hope it's still, it was there with another dress, another beautiful dress. And if FIT had it, I don't know, maybe, you know, the textiles, they're so fragile. So they might not have it, but they were rotating a couple of outfits and beautiful fans and jewelry. So it's a very small gallery. If you know, you don't want to get overwhelmed, it's beautiful just to go in.
I love it there. I think I'll take a walk.
I love that museum anyway. I think a lot of people don't know about it. So go to that museum.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an amazing museum. Well, all right. Well, thank you for everyone for joining
so much
tonight. And it was great. Hope